Signe Morrison has written on topics that lurk in the margins of history. Her published work ranges from Homefront Girl, which delights young and old alike with the diaries uncovered recently of a teenage girl written prior to World War II, to the more scholarly works that address medieval women pilgrims, excrement in the Middle Ages, and weight. And I just have to say, I love the titles of her 3 scholarly monographs, one of which is Excrement in the Late Middle Ages, Sacred Filth, and Chaucer's Fico-Poetics, which is a mouthful, but it makes me laugh every time. And I have to tell you, too, I've seen with my own eyes that Susie can make even elementary students giddy about medieval history. She presented a couple of years ago, and I got to see her at Travis Heights Elementary Young Writers Workshop, and she had 5th graders, completely engaged in speaking Old English. I don't know if they were really speaking Old English, but they sounded a lot like it. And my son came home, he was 10 at the time, with a story he started then and worked on for quite a number of weeks. And then recently, she also engaged an audience of 250 freshmen at LASA. And I think, it's hard to engage 250 freshmen at LASA, and she had everybody, I understand, quite interested in Beowulf. So Susan is a professor of English at Texas State University. She grew up in New Jersey near the Great Swamp, which is a national wildlife refuge with terrain not unlike that of Grendel's mother's mare in Beowulf. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Susan. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Laura Scheibel for introducing me. She's a great writer herself. You should ask her about her own books. And she's just a supportive, wonderful friend and writer in the Austin community. And Sarah McSweeney, I'm overwhelmed that you put one of my poems to music. In fact, it was a poem I was going to read, but I don't think I can now because I can only hear your beautiful voice performing it. So I'm totally overwhelmed. Thank you. I'm so glad everything's on tape so I can see it again and again. I'm going to do a number of short readings and make a few comments after each one. I know there's some medievalists here. There's some people who've never read Beowulf, so I'll try to help those people who haven't read Beowulf understand a little about where Grendel's mother is coming from. And I'm going to start off by reading the prologue. Once, in the long, long ago, the fisher folk and the fighting folk were one. They defended themselves from marauding wave riders. The gray time, before the fighting folks separated, held conflict and oppression, ill will, but also triumph and death. The sea was the lifeblood for the fisher folk. They worked with the whale's path that birthed and killed them. Some came to hate the seal road. It drew them away from the softness of women. The fighting folk turned to tame the brine and control it. They built longships to teem the waves and conquer the salt flood and peoples living on those shores. Who still carry those tales of that watery past? Only the poor fisher folk who bide to the shore for survival like lichens clinging to a rock. They sing the tales at sea. They croon the lays to their bairn. They chant the myths at the seaweed harvest. Clever hall shopes, eager for gold, threaten to drown the sea songs. Deeper, deeper, the salt lays are pushed beneath the waves, swelling on the surface, ripples that widen, smooth out and disappear, leaving no trace on the glassy face of the sea. The old stories that grannies and nursemaids tell in the night, whispered to soothe whimpering babes' cries, melt into the gray dusk like the people who tell them. Listen, we have heard the fame of the mere woman from days long since, how she fiercely combated her enemies after she was first found helpless. Long after the frost ogres fought with the gods, before Rome was sacked, when our ancestors, the Northmen, pillaged in their longships and plied the whale's path, a woven basket floated on the salt-rimed sea. The basket, woven wave rider, rocked with the flood, moon messenger. Foamy white peaks washed the suckling to shore, sandy beach haven. Salt encrusted, the maiden slept, skin sun-tattered scarlet. Breathing in land wind, the girl lady stirred, sensing the end of the flood, womb sheltered. That was an innocent child. So Grendel's Mother is a self-standing novel, but those people who've read Beowulf will recognize certain things in this introductory passage. The last line, that was an innocent child, is drawing from Beowulf, and an important line that appears several times in the text. That was a good king. That was god König. And it comes up again and again and forces you to think about what does make a good king. Shield shaving, who's introduced at the beginning of Beowulf, likewise floats to shore. And so I wanted to begin the poem by asking, what would happen if instead of a boy, a girl floated to shore? What would the story be like then? Just one note, this is fiction, not history, so it will deviate from some people's ideas of Beowulf, but I felt I could do that. I'll explain later why. One thing I wanted to do was to echo the language of Anglo-Saxon literature. So that meant using a lot of Germanic words, although I also incorporated, of course, Latin and French ones. Can't get away from it in modern English. But I also wanted to somehow give the feel of, but update for a contemporary novel reading audience, the feeling of Old English conventions. And so I did that through something called apposition, which are noun phrases that function like synonyms. They're called poetic variation. So instead of saying the fierce warrior, a more Anglo-Saxon thing to do would be to write the fierce warrior, weapon wielder, warlike wrecker. So poetic device, this is a poetic device that increases the density and weight of the verse. So an example might be a Cubist Picasso portrait might have 3 eyes, because you're supposed to imagine going around a person and seeing the person from different perspectives. It gives a 3D effect, and I think the Anglo-Saxon habit of doing this does an analogous thing, conjuring up a multi-dimensional world. So my Grendel's mother is named Brynhild, which means battle of the sea, and she grows up by the shore. Her old aunt, Alfsina, teaches her medical lore and the wisdom of herbs. She also has a different view about shield shaving, this famous king from the past. Shall I tell you of other fates? Oh yes, please, Auntie, said Brynhild eagerly. The old woman recounted. Hrothgar's great-grandfather was shield shaving. I heard, Auntie, that he was a great warrior. He was a great killer, which is no surprise, seeing as he was the son of a drab and a drunken layabout. He killed the true king and set himself up as a bully of the people. Then he slaughtered and raped his way across the sea. What is raped, Auntie? He took women's honor, and with it his own honor. Why would he do that, Auntie? It has been the custom for the new king to go on a rampage after he is chosen. That is to show how worthy he is to be king. By killing and disrespecting life and honor, he fills himself with honor and worth. It's a family tradition. Alfsina was scornful, disdainful dame. Hrothgar was only 30 half-years when he became king and went on many a furtive journey abroad. He proved himself worthy of that throne. Auntie, it does not sound like pleasant work. It isn't, girl. It is better to fish in your own sea and be cleansed by the salt water of the teeming waves than to create trouble for yourself. Auntie, surely the court is no longer like that. I mean, these raiding parties are no longer so acceptable, are they? I fear they'll never go out of favor, not so long as ambition rules men's hearts and bloodlust flows in their veins. So telling the story from the perspective of the women allowed me to explore the grim underside of the lives of heroes. There's a queen who tells a young woman that beheadings are man's business. And this girl thinks, surely this is woman's business too. We are the ones married off as peace-weaving brides after the blood and gore have barely dried. And 2 moments in Beowulf continue to haunt me and really spurred my writing of the novel. The first is a section called The Fight at Finnsburg. It's a poem or song within the story of Beowulf about a woman named Hildeborg who's married off to another tribe in a peace-weaving marriage. And of course, as all these peace-weaving marriages do, it disintegrates in violence and gore. Her brother dies, her son dies, and then ultimately her husband dies, and she's sent back to her original blood kin. And then at the end of Beowulf, a woman with her hair bound up laments after Beowulf has died because she knows that Beowulf's people are doomed to death for slavery. So I wanted to explore what the culture was like for women compelled to participate in peace-weaving marriages doomed to destruction and oppressed as victims of rape and bondage. Normally, I would read the slave song here, but I dare not go after Sarah's incredible performance. So I'm just going to read, this is a love poem, and those Anglo-Saxonists here may recognize a couple of lines. I look at the sea. Your ship does not churn foam, burst forth on the horizon. You have gone to conquer lands. Why did you not stay here and master a softer foe? Can you solve the riddle of us, this tangled enigma? I chose you from all the men. Music sways in your supple limbs. Wind catches your long and curly hair. You seem to have a love of song. Can you solve the riddle of us, this tangled enigma? The runic masters scratch their lines onto sacred trees and rocks. You've scraped into my white bones your weird and magical lay. Can you solve the riddle of us, this tangled enigma? Finally, Brynhild gives birth, and we all know who she gives birth to since she's Grendel's mother. The pain was hard and long. So is winter. Spring inevitably arrives no matter how thick the frost. Women helped the womb-bound woman. Strong spells they spoke. Hildilid and Alshina dissolved dried hare's heart into warm water and fed it to Brynhild so that her pain would ease. They seethed old lard in water and bathed her vulva with it. Then she drank hollyhock boiled in ale. These potions eased her pains after birth. In such a way did Odrun, Atli's sister, aid Borgny. That mother's twins could not pass out until the midwife, grieving for Gunnar, sang splendid songs. Brynhild bore a son which pleased the father. The Norns fixed his fate, spun his fate thread, allotted his life. Ravens, wolves, and eagles rejoiced at his birth. This was a hero indeed. So I interlace Norse and Germanic myths throughout the text, many of which are not as familiar to us as the Latin and Greek mythology and legends. So in the back there's a glossary for those names you may not know right at your fingertips. And I also included some medical recipes. So a lot of these medical recipes can be found in an edition called Bald's Leech Book, which must be the best name ever for a book. Bald's Leech Book. Leechdoms are medical recipes. And sometimes I would leave out an ingredient or two, so you can't do these at home. Do not practice these things at home. Some recipes from our perspective may seem a little crazy. For example, it's said that for a woman who hemorrhages too much, she should get a horse turd. That's that excrement again. Get a horse turd and put it on the fire, and she should stand over it and fumigate herself with the smoke. And I always wondered how someone would do that without burning herself. So I would definitely not try that one at home. But some of the recipes and folk remedies I think would have been efficacious, either through the placebo effect or, for example, a tea made from willow bark could have helped because aspirin is synthesized from elements occurring in the willow plant. Also, a number of recipes involve chanting charms, and music therapy is said to be curative. The charms and their rhythms might have had a healing effect. Ultimately, in the story, as in Beowulf, a hall is built, and Brynhild speaks to a visiting shope that some medievalists here may recognize. She says to this visiting shope or minstrel, "What else can you sing for us, O wide traveler Widsith? It is a sad song, lady, a mournful moan, the hall hubbub hushed. The last lady of her people stood in the ashes, wept for woe, praised with keening. No longer would her lord bestow treasure, hold hall joy, drink mead. The wreckers were wounded, heroes humbled, women made hostage, children enslaved. Their baby fingers would bleed for barbarians, boys beaten, virgins violated. Vandal victors would deny them of parents, siblings, home, and language. These would exist only in memory, precious token, revered relic. This they would shelter in the heart hoard, storing sorrow. The wavy-haired Wyrd-Wife lamented her love, grieved for her girl, bewailed her boy, pined for the past. She was the last alive, sole survivor, hating that hollow happiness. Even the drunken men held their peace as the glee wood was strummed. Melancholy music faded into rafters, drifted over the land, floated across flotsam, sailed over shores, rode over realm. Then a woman sang, made her mournful moan. Now he is gone, our breakwater against aliens who wash ashore. The flood will not ebb. The armies come, spilling over beaches. Their heavy boots sink in the sand. They pull them sucking out like the wind before a storm, laying waste to the land. The longboats bring terror. No one will be spared. Tonight, the moon is full. The tide will be high. Having the confines of the story of Beowulf helped me to write the book, actually. I wrote the world of Grendel's mother within the halls of the wall of the Beowulf poem, so to speak, and I chose to lurk in the obscure corners of that poetic edifice, much like Grendel and his mother. Beowulf includes a lot of flashbacks and flash forwards, and these moments briefly and tantalizingly suggest all sorts of violent events and tragic occurrences that take place, as it were, off stage. So that's where I chose to go. You'll notice that I changed the fates for certain people. Grendel's fate is not exactly as it is in Beowulf, but I feel I was actually allowed to do this by the Beowulf poet himself. At one point in Beowulf, the minstrel or show tells the story of Siegmund and the dragon. And even at the time that the Beowulf poem was written, there were multiple legends and versions of it, and the Beowulf poet chose his own version. So I feel I'm just invited to present my own version of this particular story. I don't want to give any spoiler alerts, so I will just say for this next passage, a warrior loves a maiden who offers herself up in ritual sacrifice. This is his response. Dead flesh, so cold. Last night I held you to my breast. I felt your heart beat against mine. The ember's glow glinted off your red gold hair. I smelled your skin. But now you are hard and pale. My fingers cannot stroke you, warm and quivering. Oh, dead one, you have betrayed me. How dare you leave me here alone and alive? Why didn't you kill me when you chose your fate? I hate you, beloved, for letting me lose myself in my love for you. My flesh is warm. My heart cannot still. I turn hard and pale. My next embrace will be of death. A character is killed in a bloody way. I have been told men held that struggling youth. Then sword gave good service, piercing the belly. Beowulf severed ribs, pulled out lungs. He cut the blood-eagled bird of gore. He was no stranger to carving. That youth was covered in dew of sorrow. Beowulf kicked the corpse savagely. The girl screamed and raved. She had no chance for one last talk with him, hewn for hawks, ravaged for ravens. Broken by foemen, her bosom friend was dead. The men surrounded her. The whalebone casket depicts the vengeance of Wayland, smith of the gods, fashioning fetters never falling away and swords of uncommon strength. He made beauty